Hello and welcome to another episode of Book Gems, where I share one of my favorite books and I randomly select ideas or quotes from the book and we dig into them a little bit. You can do this with any book that's on your bookshelf. If you need a little bit of boost of inspiration, there's a book on your shelf that you can just open up, flip to a page, and find something that you may need, the exact thing that you might need for that day. Today, I'm so excited because I'm talking about On Writing by Stephen King, which is such a great book. And this episode is really for a writer because this book, On Writing, great name, right? It's all about writing. And you also get to learn a little bit about Stephen King and what got him into writing and just his idea of writing and just a little bit about his life, which is interesting. It's such a great book about writing, and I've read quite a few of them. I'm actually not a huge fan of Stephen King's novels because simply for the fact that I don't like scary movies, I don't like scary things, and so I don't actually read a lot of his books, but obviously he has written many of them and he's extraordinarily successful, so he knows some things about writing. So, that's what book we're diving into today. Here we go. So right before I went live, I flipped through 3 different sections and found some ideas to share with you today. All right. So the first page that I flipped through, he shares. Oh, this is all when he was talking about. So if you're writing a book, if you're writing anything, he said when you're finished writing the book to put it away. So he said basically after you're finished with your manuscript, this is what he says. My advice is that you take a couple days off, go fishing, go kayaking, do a jigsaw puzzle, and then go work on something else, something shorter, preferably, and something that is a complete change of direction and pace from your newly finished book. So then he goes on and on to kind of talk a little bit about why. And I thought this part was interesting because if you write a book, or let's just say you even write something that you want to publish in a magazine, or you're working on a blog post or something that's really long form, there's something really interesting about putting it away and just letting it be. And especially when you're finished writing a book, you want it, like, you want to finish it. You want to get it done. You want it to be published. You want to put it out into the world. And there is something really interesting about giving it some space, letting it breathe, and going about your day and doing whatever else you need. And then when you come back to it, and he talks about this in the book, and I got to experience it when I wrote my first book. You go back to it, and it's almost as though you wrote it, like you remember writing it, but it's also there are certain pieces of it where you're like, wait a second. Oh, that's interesting. I don't remember writing that. Or, oh, I that's interesting how I worded that. Or I wonder why I worded it that way instead of this way. And what's really interesting about that is that because you've went on and started working on another project, you're learning more about your writing style, your writing, just what influences you, what you're curious about. And so going back to your work after you've given it some time, a couple of weeks or whatever it is, you see it differently, which I don't know, it was a cool experience. So when I read that, I thought that was really fun to hear from someone like him who has just written so many incredible books. All right, the second idea is this on page 135. And he says, grab that book you were looking at off the shelf. Grab that book you were looking at off the shelf, would you? The weight of it in your hands tells you other stuff that you can take in without reading a single word. The book's length, naturally, but more, the commitment the writer shouldered in order to create the work, the commitment constant reader must make to digest it. So then he goes on and on about how it's not about the length of the book and how words create sentences, and goes through all these things about writing and what happens during the writing process. But what I really enjoyed about this is just that idea, the this idea of that every time you take a book off your shelf, think about. We don't really think about it, right? We take a book off the shelf and we're reading it and we're trying to digest it and we want to learn something from it, or we're reading it for entertainment and pleasure. But there was somebody's idea behind that, and it took a long time to craft the sentences and the right words. It's almost like, when you're reading a great book and sometimes you don't, maybe you don't even remember one particular thing that it said, but the essence of the book, you remember how it made you feel. You remember the tone. You remember wanting to go back to those pages. And there might be a book in your life where you almost waited to read it a couple of days because you knew that if you picked it up and you read it, you were going to be finished with it, and then you'd be sad because you'd be finished with the book. And there was someone behind that. There was this writer, whoever wrote the book, that had to take the time to sit down, to come up with the idea, to write it out, to craft better sentences, because most writers, well, all writers really, no matter how wonderful you are, you have to write a lot of words in order to figure out the few that you're going to actually leave on the page to create the story, or whatever it is, if it's a nonfiction book, to create that experience for the reader. So I really, really loved that. All right. And number 3 is on page 120, where he says, he says, must you write complete sentences each time, every time? Perish the thought. If your work consists only of fragments and floating clauses, the grammar police aren't going to come and take you away. Even William Strunk, the Mussolini of rhetoric, recognized the delicious pliability of language. It is an old observation, he writes, that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules of rhetoric. Yet he goes on to add this thought, which I urge you to consider. Unless he is certain of doing well, the writer will probably do best to follow the rules. Anyway, so now in this section, he's talking all about how, yes, it's best to follow the rules, but there are also writers that sometimes don't follow the rules. And when I read that, I thought it was interesting because I've also spoken to other authors who said, grammatically, this is the right way to put it. However, in the book, they might change it a little bit, only because it's the language that most people are used to. And so when we're writing, yes, of course, we want to get spelling and grammar and all of those things right. 100%. Yes. However, there are certain phrases that people are actually saying wrong. And so I know that some authors, they end up going in a different direction slightly because it's about the reader's experience. And if the reader's experience, if we're used to certain language and then we take them out of that language and follow a particular rule, then we're kind of disrupting the reader's experience, which is what we don't want when someone's reading a book. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting that he wrote that, especially because I have talked to other authors who have said similar things. Again, I'm not saying that writers don't want to make sure that they do everything they possibly can. I mean, you edit your work over and over and over to make sure that you're not missing any grammatical errors, punctuation, all that kind of stuff. That's a whole thing that writers do. We don't want to publish work with a ton of errors in it, but I thought that was interesting that he wrote that. So if you are a writer, or if you are interested in writing a book or anything within the next 12 months, On Writing by Stephen King is a really remarkable book. Plus, it's just fun hearing stories of how people create their work processes. He talks a little bit about how we need to take this approach of writing with the door closed and sometimes writing with it open. And when the door is closed, it's literally just for you, meaning it's just getting everything out onto the page first. Like, we're not censoring ourselves. We're just allowing all of those ideas to flow, getting it out in order for us to then take that, edit it down, and create a different type of story, whatever story that we're trying to create. So it's an interesting book, really fascinating, and it's one that I really appreciate. So check that book out. I hope that you found some of these ideas inspiring, especially if you are considering writing a book. And I look forward to seeing you in the next Book Gems video. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, go create something.